The storm makes its own rules. Snow eats the road behind the truck like it never existed. Headlights carve two narrow tunnels, nothing else. Officer_EC, calm, focused male officer, early 30s, medium athletic build, defined jawline, short textured dark hair, light stubble, slightly tired eyes, natural skin texture with pores, tactical police uniform with subtle wear marks, grounded realistic expression keeps both hands loose on the wheel, controlled. K9_Shadow, black and tan German Shepherd, black saddle pattern, black facial mask, golden tan fur, upright alert ears, amber eyes, small notch on left ear, muscular structure, realistic fur texture, tactical K9 harness, sits upright. Still. Then the dog's posture changes, not sudden, just tighter. A breath held, a nostril flare. Ahead, a cabin window glows warm. A shadow crosses it, slow, human. The truck rolls into trees, headlights die, silence gets louder. The mountain didn't feel like a place you visited. It felt like a decision you made, and then lived with. Snow erased the road behind Officer Ethan Cole in a way that was almost personal, like the weather wanted to close the door once he stepped through. The truck's headlights punched two narrow tunnels into the whiteout, but everything beyond those beams was just moving milk, wind, flurries, and the occasional dark blur of pine trunks sliding past like silhouettes that refused to be recognized. Ethan's hand stayed loose on the wheel. Not relaxed, controlled. Relaxed was what you did on a Sunday drive with a warm coffee between your knees. This was different. This was the kind of night that reminded you why people died in places like this, because they thought the mountain was merely cold. It wasn't. It was indifferent. Beside him, K9 Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat with the stillness of a creature built for work. The German Shepherd's posture didn't scream alarm. It didn't need to. Shadow's ears shifted in precise increments, triangulating sounds Ethan couldn't hear through the glass and wind. His amber eyes didn't blink much. They tracked. Ethan glanced at him once, a quick check. Shadow met his look for a beat, then returned his attention to the darkness ahead, as if to say, "Keep driving, don't get careless." Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. It was a habit he'd built over years on the job. The breath wasn't about calm. It was about tempo. When you controlled your tempo, you didn't let panic pick it for you. The cabin, fire lookout really, was new to him. Not new as in freshly built, new as in newly claimed, like an old scar you finally decided to own. A decommissioned structure perched above the tree line, wedged into the mountain's shoulder with a view that could make you feel small on clear days. He'd bought it cheap because it needed work and because it was far from everything. The noise, the pity, the well-meaning questions from neighbors who didn't know how to speak to a man who carried too much quiet. He told himself he wanted solitude. The truth was uglier and simpler. He wanted fewer variables. A city was 1,000 variables every minute: people, traffic, calls, sirens. The constant possibility that the next radio crackle would pull you into someone else's worst day. Up here, he thought, maybe there would be only snow and wood and the honest rhythm of fixing what was broken. Maybe the silence would finally stop feeling like a threat. The wind disagreed. It pushed against the truck like a body checking a door. The tires whispered over packed ice. Ethan drove by, feel as much as sight, reading the steering wheel's subtle feedback like Braille. Then Shadow's head lifted higher, not sudden, not dramatic, just different. His nostrils flared. His shoulders tightened as if an invisible leash had gone taut. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" he murmured, mostly to himself. Shadow's gaze locked forward, unblinking. The lookout came into view in pieces, the dark verticals of supports, the pale angles of snow-choked steps, the cabin box crouched at the top like a stubborn thought. Ethan expected darkness. He expected the dead look of an empty place, black windows, drifting snow, nothing moving. Instead, he saw warm light, a rectangle of amber glow behind the front window, not the weak reflection of headlights, the steadier pulse of an interior lamp or fire. And within it, motion. A shadow crossing the light, slow and human, like someone pacing. Ethan's foot eased off the gas. The truck rolled forward on momentum. Engine noise softened. For a moment, the only sound inside the cab was the wiper blades dragging across ice like tired metronomes. His heartbeat didn't spike. It shifted. There was a difference. Spiking was panic. Shifting was readiness. Shadow's chest gave a low, quiet vibration. Not a bark. Not even a growl you'd hear across a room. More like a warning that lived in bone. Ethan pulled the truck into the trees short of the clearing, letting the branches swallow his silhouette from the cabin's line of sight. He killed the headlights. The world snapped dim, leaving only the faint glow from the cabin above and the white smear of snow reflecting what little moonlight fought through the storm. For a beat, he sat still, listening, watching. He didn't climb out immediately. He didn't march straight up the steps like a man who owned paper and thought paper made him safe. Ownership didn't stop bullets. Ownership didn't stop someone desperate. He opened the glove compartment and checked the small flashlight, the spare batteries. His radio was useless up here half the time, and tonight the storm made the air feel heavy, like it would swallow signals the way it swallowed tracks. He looked at Shadow. "Stay with me," he whispered. Shadow's ears flicked back once, the closest thing the dog had to a yes. Ethan stepped out. The cold hit like a slap. Wind-driven snow stung his cheeks instantly. The world smelled clean and sharp, but underneath it, Ethan caught something else, faint, almost out of place. Smoke. Not the natural scent of distant chimneys from the town below. This was close, real, and new. He moved through the trees in a wide arc, boots sinking quietly into the drifts. Shadow flowed beside him, a dark shape that seemed to glide rather than step. Ethan scanned for tracks. There were some, old ones, probably his from the last trip up. But near the last stretch before the cabin, he saw something that didn't belong, a narrow path of disturbed snow, lighter footfalls, smaller boots, and another set of prints. Not Shadow's. Too small, too scattered, like little paws skittering where they weren't sure which direction was safe. Ethan's jaw tightened. He approached the cabin from the side, staying out of the window's direct view. He paused under the eaves, listening. Inside, the place made the small noises a cabin makes when it's warmed after being frozen. Wood expanding, an occasional crack like a knuckle popping. Then he heard something softer. A shuffle, a breath, and, very faint, an anxious whine that sounded too high to be an adult dog. Ethan's eyes flicked to Shadow. Shadow's gaze was fixed on the door, body angled forward, ready, but not lunging, controlled. Ethan climbed the steps with care. The boards creaked under the snow, loud in the silence. He hated that. Noise gave away position. But there was no way to move like a ghost on old lumber. He reached the door. Knocked once, firm. He waited. Nothing. He knocked again. This time he heard movement inside, fast, startled. Something bumped, a sharp inhale. Ethan's voice came out low, calm, the way he spoke to victims in shock and suspects on edge. "This is Officer Ethan Cole," he said, loud enough to be heard, not loud enough to turn into a threat. "You're in my cabin. I need you to answer me." Silence stretched. Then a voice, female, young and strained thin, like it had been used too hard. "Please," it said, "please don't." Ethan didn't move his hand to the knob yet. He kept his posture open, shoulders down. He didn't want to be a silhouette of authority in a doorway. He wanted to be a human, offering a boundary. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, "but you have to talk to me." Another pause. The door unlatched. It opened a crack. Warm air spilled out, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp fabric. The crack widened, and Ethan saw her. Dr. Lena Moore, though he didn't know her name yet, stood with her body blocking the opening, as if she could physically hold the cabin behind her. She looked mid-30s at most, but exhaustion made age unreliable. Her face was pale from cold, her lips chapped. Dark hair, hastily tied back, with loose strands stuck to her cheeks. Her eyes were the most striking thing, sharp and intelligent, but rimmed red like she hadn't slept in days. And in her arms, bundled against her chest under a too-thin jacket, were two small puppies. Not just one, two. Their heads poked out like hesitant questions. One was a darker mutt with floppy ears and a trembling chin. The other was lighter, mottled gray-white, with ears too big for its skull and eyes that watched Ethan like a tiny judge. Ethan's gaze took it all in fast. Not in a way that appraised her worth, in a way that assessed reality. She was cold, she was scared, she was not posturing, and she was protecting those puppies like they were oxygen. Shadow stepped forward beside Ethan, head lowered slightly, not in aggression, but in focus. The puppies stiffened. Lena's arms tightened instinctively. Her breath hitched. Ethan lifted one hand, palm visible. "Shadow," he murmured. The German shepherd froze on command, then slowly sat, still alert, but grounded. His presence filled the doorway like a promise. Lena's eyes flicked from Ethan's face to the dog and back. "You're police," she said, as if testing whether the word was safe to say. "Yes," Ethan replied, "and this is my place, which means I need the truth." Her jaw flexed as if she were biting down on panic. "I'm not here to steal anything," she said quickly. I saw it was empty. The storm. I was going to leave." Ethan kept his tone flat and steady. "Where's your car?" She flinched at the question. That flinch was information. "I don't have one," she said. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, not cruelly, just attentive. "Okay," he said. "Then how did you get here?" She swallowed. Her gaze dropped to the puppies. "On foot," she admitted. "Part of the way." "From where?" Her throat worked. The storm pressed at the doorway as if impatient to get in. "I can't tell you," she whispered. Ethan held the silence for a moment. He didn't fill it with threats. He didn't say, "I'll arrest you." That wasn't the point. The point was the shape of fear in her body. It didn't feel like guilt. It felt like pursuit. Shadow shifted his weight, then, without being commanded, lowered himself to the cabin floor, belly down, head extended toward the puppies. Slow, non-threatening. The darker puppy made a tiny sound, unsure. Shadow inched forward until his nose touched the puppy's paw, then he gave a single, gentle lick. The puppy blinked, startled, then sniffed back. The mottled one leaned forward a fraction, as if curiosity overcame fear by an inch. Lena's shoulders loosened, just barely. Ethan saw it, and something in his own chest eased with it. Shadow didn't trust easily, not after what he'd seen. If the dog was choosing softness, it meant something. Ethan made a decision. Not a permanent one, not a reckless one, a controlled one. "You can come inside," he said, stepping over the threshold only after she backed away. "Out of the wind, but we talk and you keep your hands where I can see them." Lena nodded too quickly, like she'd been waiting for permission to breathe. Ethan entered. Warmth wrapped his face. The cabin's interior looked lived in a way Ethan didn't expect. A small fire in the stove, damp gloves hung near it, a blanket thrown on the couch. She had tried to make it safe, which meant she didn't feel safe. Shadow padded in behind Ethan and immediately moved through the room, sniffing corners, windows, the back door. Not frantic, methodical. Ethan shut the door and slid the deadbolt. He noticed the scratch marks on the latch plate, fresh. His eyes flicked to Lena. "Someone tried this door," he said. Her face drained of the last color. I didn't do that," she whispered. "I didn't think you did." That landed harder than he intended. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Crying required a future. Ethan set his gloves on the table. His posture stayed calm, but he placed himself where he could see both windows and the door. "Name," he said. She hesitated. Then, like she was surrendering something she'd been guarding, she said, "Lena." Ethan waited. "Moore," she added quietly. "Dr. Lena Moore." The title wasn't a flex. It sounded like a shield that had cracked. Ethan nodded once. "Okay, Dr. Moore. Why are you here with 2 puppies in a blizzard?" Her eyes flicked away. To the fire, to the floor, to Shadow, who had returned and now sat near her knee, watching the room like a sentry. "I copied something I wasn't supposed to," she said at last. Ethan didn't interrupt. He let her speak at her own speed. "The work. I do analysis," she continued, voice rough. "Environmental forensics. Patterns. Chemical signatures. It's not like TV. It's boring until it isn't." Her hands tightened around the puppies, and Ethan realized they were shaking. Not from cold anymore. From adrenaline. "I found data that didn't match what they were reporting," Lena said. "And then I found why. There are disposal routes, off-books. It's poisoning groundwater." Ethan's face didn't change much, but inside, a cold line drew itself across his thoughts. Because poisoning groundwater wasn't a petty crime. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the kind of thing people killed for because it involved money and silence and the assumption that nobody poor enough to drink from the wrong well would ever be listened to. You took files, Ethan said, making it a statement, not a question. Lena nodded. Copies. Why? Her gaze snapped to his, sharp, almost angry. Because people are getting sick, she said, and it's being labeled bad luck and old infrastructure and rural health issues. Because it's invisible until it isn't, and by the time it's visible, it's too late. Ethan felt something move behind his ribs. Not pity, respect. Shadow leaned closer to Lena's leg, touching her with his shoulder like a quiet anchor. The puppies relaxed a fraction, tucked in her arms. Ethan kept his voice even. You said you're being hunted. Lena swallowed. I'm being contained, watched, pressured. Somebody wants the copies back. And you don't trust local law enforcement, Ethan said. Her laugh was bitter and small. I don't trust anyone who can be bought for the price of a new truck. Ethan didn't argue. He couldn't, not honestly. He'd worn a uniform long enough to know the spectrum of what people did with authority. He stared at the fire for a beat, as if looking for an answer in the flames. Then he made another disciplined choice. What evidence do you have on you? He asked. Lena hesitated again, then reached into the inner lining of her jacket and pulled out a small sealed bag, waterproof, inside which was a compact flash drive. Ethan's eyes narrowed. That's it? It's enough, she said. Names, logs, coordinates, a schedule that repeats. Ethan nodded slowly. If it's enough, it's also worth enough for someone to do something stupid. Lena's breath hitched. Outside, the wind dragged nails across the cabin walls. The storm didn't care about evidence or justice. It only cared about physics. But men cared about evidence. Men cared about silence. Shadow's head snapped toward the front window. His ears went forward. The hair along his shoulders rose in a thin line. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. Nothing obvious, just snow and dark trees. But Shadow didn't lie. Ethan moved to the window carefully and peered out through a thin gap in the curtain. At first he saw only white. Then, there, a subtle interruption in the snow near the edge of the tree line, something that looked like a shape where there shouldn't be one. A trunk? Maybe. Or maybe a man standing very still. Ethan's pulse stayed steady, but his mind began to lay out possibilities, like cards. He stepped back from the window, keeping his voice low. Lena, he said, listen carefully. I'm not going to call local deputies up here in the middle of a storm and hope for the best. Her eyes searched his face, desperate for meaning. But I am going to contact my supervisor, Ethan continued, Captain Maria Hayes. She's smart, she's careful, and she's not going to freelance this through small-town politics. Lena exhaled shakily, like she'd been holding her lungs hostage. Ethan added, We preserve the evidence. We keep the chain clean. We don't run blind. Lena nodded, swallowing hard. Okay. Shadow moved to Ethan's side and pressed his shoulder lightly into Ethan's thigh. Silent communication, the kind you built over years of trust and crisis. You see it too, Ethan thought. He reached for his phone, already knowing signal would be a fight. But discipline wasn't about certainty. It was about doing the right thing anyway. Ethan tried the phone anyway. The screen showed one bar, then none, then a lonely dot that promised nothing. He moved the device toward the window as if proximity to cold glass might persuade the sky to cooperate. Shadow watched the phone like it was a suspect. Lena stood near the stove, puppies tucked into the crook of her elbows, shoulders rigid. Her eyes kept flicking to the curtains as if she expected them to breathe. Signal's weak, Ethan said, more to set a tone than to share news. But weak isn't dead. He walked to the back corner of the cabin where the floorboards dipped slightly, an old quirk that had annoyed him the first time he toured the place. It was higher elevation by inches, but up here, inches sometimes mattered. He held the phone up and waited. One bar. He tapped Maria's contact. The call spun. Shadow's ears lifted, catching the faint electronic warble. Lena's breath tightened. Then nothing. A hard drop to voicemail. Ethan didn't curse. He just tried again, adjusting his stance, turning his shoulders, angling the phone like an antenna. Second attempt, it rang once, twice, and then the line caught. Static hissed in his ear like wind through reeds. Cole? A woman's voice snapped through, low, controlled, awake in a way that meant she had never fully been asleep. Captain Hayes, Ethan said immediately. I'm at the lookout cabin. A pause. Not confusion, calculation. Maria Hayes didn't waste seconds on questions she could answer by tone alone. "Why do I feel like Lookout Cabin is not a vacation update?" she asked. Ethan's mouth tightened in a faint half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Because it isn't," he said. "I have a civilian here, Dr. Lena Moore, environmental forensic analyst. She's got copied files, routes, names, coordinates, evidence of illegal dumping into groundwater. She believes she's being tracked. I found signs someone's tested the cabin, shadows alerting outside." The static surged, then settled. Maria's voice stayed even, but the warmth fell out of it. "Do you trust her?" she asked. Ethan glanced at Lena. Her arms tightened around the puppies, as if she could keep them from trembling by force. "I trust what fear looks like," Ethan said, "and I trust Shadow." Another pause. Ethan could hear Maria's mind moving, triaging, routing, deciding where to put her weight. "Do not contact local," Maria said. "I'll handle notifications. Can you maintain evidence integrity?" "Yes." "Are you armed?" "Yes." "Is the cabin defensible?" Ethan's gaze tracked the windows, the old wood, the angles of the room. He pictured fire. He pictured glass. He pictured men with patience. "Defensible enough for weather," he said. "Not if someone wants it badly." Maria's breath came through the line, calm, controlled, like Ethan's. "Then your priority is life," she said. "Not property, not ego, not the cabin. You keep Lena alive. You keep that drive intact. You keep your dog alive. I'm sending someone I trust with a satellite radio and supplies. He's green but competent. Deputy Lucas Reed." Ethan's jaw clenched slightly at the word green. He didn't dislike rookies. He disliked variables. "ETA?" he asked. "Depends on the road," Maria said. "But he's already moving. Stay inside. Do not go hunting in that storm." Ethan's eyes flicked to the curtains again. "Understood," he said. Maria's voice softened by a hair. "Ethan," she added, "if anyone shows up before Lucas, treat it as hostile until proven otherwise." He didn't need the reminder, but he appreciated that she didn't pretend. "Copy," he said. The line crackled once more, and then died. Ethan stared at the dark screen for a beat, feeling the old familiar weight of "now it's real." Lena's voice came small. "She believes me?" Ethan looked at her. "She believes me," he said. "And I'm telling her you're here. That's as close to belief as the world gets at midnight." Lena swallowed. Her eyes shone, but she kept them open. Shadow moved to the window again, nose angled toward the seam where cold air sneaked through. He didn't bark. He didn't scratch. He listened. Ethan walked to the cabinet above the sink and pulled out a roll of duct tape and a thick contractor bag, leftovers from his repairs. He tore strips, set them on the table. "What are you doing?" Lena asked. "Reducing glass," Ethan replied. He moved to the front window and taped an X across it, then another, creating a web. It wouldn't stop a break, but it would keep the shards from turning into a storm inside the room. Lena stared at the tape like it was prophecy. "You think they're coming," she said. Ethan didn't answer the way she wanted. "I think the mountain gives people permission," he said, "to do what they'd never try in daylight." He moved to the other window and repeated the tape pattern. Shadow stayed close, eyes tracking Ethan's hands and the outside world at once. Lena sat on the couch, puppies bundled in a blanket. The darker one, Milo, she'd muttered earlier, without realizing she'd spoken, pressed his nose into her sleeve. The mottled one, Rosie, watched Shadow like she was trying to memorize how courage moved. Ethan checked the doors, front and back, then placed a chair under each handle to wedge them tighter. He wasn't building a fortress. He was buying seconds. Seconds saved lives. He knelt beside Shadow and rested a hand on the dog's chest. Shadow's heart beat steady. Not calm, ready. Ethan could feel the vibration of contained force beneath fur. "Stay quiet," he murmured. Shadow's ears flicked back, as if he understood the assignment. Time in a storm did strange things. It stretched. It snapped. It became viscous, like cold syrup. The wind kept throwing itself against the cabin. Snow crept up the windowsills. The fire in the stove breathed low heat into the room, but cold still lived in the corners. Lena did not sleep. Neither did Ethan. Neither did Shadow. The puppies dozed in short fits, waking every time the cabin creaked too sharply or the wind changed tone. Ethan's attention kept circling back to the same thought. They tested the door. Testing meant planning. Planning meant time. and men with time were more dangerous than men with rage. When headlights finally appeared, faint at first, then clearer, Ethan didn't feel relief. Not yet. He moved to the side window and watched the glow cut through snow, bouncing strangely on the drifted road. The vehicle climbed slowly, careful, as if whoever drove it respected ice. Shadow moved with him, head lifted. Lena sat up straight, face pale. The truck, an older county vehicle, rolled into the clearing and stopped. The engine idled. A door opened. A figure stepped out, bundled, head down against wind. "Sheriff's office," the voice called through the door. Male, young, a little too bright, like someone trying to sound confident because he wasn't sure he felt it. "Deputy Lucas Reed. Officer Cole, Captain Hayes sent me." Ethan's eyes narrowed. That name matched Mariah's promise, but Ethan didn't trust names shouted through wood. He spoke through the door. "State your badge number," Ethan said. There was a pause, then a quick exhale like irritation swallowed. 2174, Lucas replied. "Look, sir, it's freezing and my radio's barely—" "Describe my dog," Ethan cut in. Silence, then, "German Shepherd, deep sable coat, scar, right flank." Ethan's jaw unclenched a fraction. That detail wasn't public. He slid the deadbolt halfway, opened the door a crack, keeping his body behind it. Lucas Reed stood there, with snow clinging to his shoulders, cheeks raw from wind. He looked mid-20s, energetic build, eyes wide with that mix of fear and excitement rookies got when the story in their head collided with the world's sharp edges. He held up both hands and backed a step, respectful. Shadow appeared behind Ethan, silent as a shadow should be, eyes locked on Lucas. Lucas froze. He didn't reach for his holster. Good, he just swallowed. "Hey," Lucas said softly, voice careful. "Buddy, I'm not here to cause trouble." Ethan didn't open the door a little wider. "Get inside," Ethan said. "Fast." Lucas stepped in, shaking off snow. He carried a duffel bag, a hard case, and a satellite radio pack strapped across his chest like a life vest. His gaze flicked, too fast, across the room. The taped windows, the chair wedged under the back door, the woman on the couch with puppies. He looked back at Ethan, eyes questioning. Ethan didn't explain yet. Explanation was a luxury for when you were safe. Lucas tugged the radio off his shoulder and set it on the table. "Captain Hayes said comms might be bad," he said, "but this should punch through if we get enough." He stopped mid-sentence. The device's screen flickered once, then went blank. Lucas frowned, tapped it. Nothing. Ethan's stomach sank in a controlled way. Not surprise, confirmation. Lucas tried again, pressing buttons, adjusting the antenna. The radio made a faint chirp, then died. "What the?" Lucas muttered. Ethan's voice stayed flat. "Interference," he said. "Either weather or something else." Lucas's head snapped up. "Something else?" Ethan didn't answer directly. He looked at Shadow. Shadow's ears were forward, body angled slightly toward the back of the cabin. Lucas followed that line with his eyes, face tightening. Lena spoke for the first time since Lucas entered, voice tight. "It's not the weather," she said. Lucas looked at her. Really looked. Took in her exhausted face, the protective way she held the puppies, the fact she hadn't stood up to greet him like an innocent tourist. His expression shifted from rookie excitement to something heavier. "Okay," Lucas said slowly. "Okay, so what are we doing?" Ethan studied him for a beat, judging how much truth Lucas could carry without dropping it. Then Ethan chose directness. "We're holding evidence," Ethan said, "and someone might be trying to retrieve it. Captain Hayes sent you because she trusts you. That means I have to trust you." Lucas nodded quickly, maybe too quickly, but his eyes were serious now. "I'm in," he said. "What do you need?" Ethan gestured to the duffel. "Supplies," Ethan said, "then perimeter confirmation." Lucas unzipped the bag and pulled out emergency blankets, protein bars, a couple of hand warmers, and a small first aid kit. He set them on the table like offerings. Then he looked at the taped windows again. "Perimeter confirmation, how?" Ethan's gaze went to Shadow. Shadow didn't bark, he didn't whine. He simply stood and moved to the back window as if pulled by a string. He stared into the storm. Lucas swallowed. "You want me to go outside?" Lucas asked. Ethan didn't soften it. "Yes," he said. "But not alone," Lucas blinked. "You're coming?" Ethan shook his head. "Shadow's going," Ethan said. "You're going with him. You do not wander. You do not chase. You do not try to be a hero, you follow my dog." Lucas looked offended for half a second, then he caught himself. "Copy," he said, voice quieter. "Follow the dog." Ethan moved to the back door, checked the wedge, slid it free. 2 minutes, Ethan said. "In and out." Lucas nodded, pulled his hood tighter, and opened the door into a wall of cold. Shadow slipped out first, a dark streak vanishing into white. Lucas followed, boots crunching, body hunched against wind. Ethan watched them through the crack, then shut the door and locked it again, breathing slow. Lena's voice came out like she couldn't stop it. "If they're out there." Ethan didn't look away from the window. "Then we'll know," he said. The 2 minutes stretched to 4. Ethan's attention sharpened. He held his breath without realizing. Then he saw movement through the snow. Lucas and Shadow returning, Lucas's flashlight beam jittering. The door opened. Lucas stumbled in, shaking snow off, face tight. Shadow came in last, calm, but the way he moved, shoulders higher, tail held lower, said something is wrong. Lucas shut the door hard. "They're circling," Lucas said, voice low. "Fresh tire tracks, not ours, not mine. They looped the property, like they were checking angles." Ethan's jaw clenched. Containment. Lucas continued, swallowing. "Also, there's this smell. Not just smoke, like gasoline or something." Ethan's eyes narrowed. He looked at Lena. Lena's face went whiter. "No," she whispered. Ethan's brain moved fast, but not frantic. Gasoline in a storm could mean many things. A stranded vehicle, a spill, or a plan. Shadow went to the stove and sniffed, then turned, nose lifting toward the ceiling as if testing the air. Ethan felt his shoulders go still. He knew that posture. He knew that scent reading. Shadow wasn't interested in the cabin's warmth. He was tracking what the wind carried. Ethan walked to the window again. The storm still swallowed sight, but now he noticed something else. Subtle, almost invisible. A faint haze low to the ground, not snow. Smoke. But not from their chimney. This was coming from somewhere beyond the ridge. Diffuse. Spreading. Lucas saw it too. His voice thinned. "Sir," he said, "that's not normal smoke." Ethan's mind snapped to a brutal, simple truth. If someone wanted them out of the cabin, kicking the door in wasn't the smartest move. Weather made fights unpredictable. But fire? Fire turned everything into a funnel. Fire forced movement. Fire destroyed evidence under the excuse of accident. Ethan turned away from the window. "Pack," he said. Lucas blinked. "Pack what?" "Everything that matters," Ethan said. "Fast and light." Lena stared at him, eyes wide. "What are you saying?" Ethan's voice stayed steady, but it carried steel now. "I'm saying they're not trying to break in," he said. "They're trying to flush us." Shadow pressed against Ethan's leg, a solid weight of certainty. Lucas swallowed hard, adrenaline rising like a tide. "And if it's a fire line," Ethan nodded once, "then the cabin becomes a coffin." Lena tightened her arms around the puppies. Milo whimpered. Rosie's ears flattened. Ethan moved with controlled speed. No panic, no wasted motion. He grabbed a waterproof pouch and held his hand out to Lena. "The drive," he said. Lena hesitated only a fraction before she shoved it into his palm. Ethan sealed it inside, then tucked it inside his inner jacket pocket, where body heat and proximity would protect it. Lucas snatched the emergency blankets and stuffed them into the duffel. Ethan's eyes swept the room, counting essentials like a checklist. Evidence, warmth, light, first aid, puppy containment. He grabbed a rope from near the door and a small collapsible carrier he'd bought for Shadow's gear. It wasn't meant for puppies, but it could keep them quiet. Lena's voice shook. "Where do we go?" Ethan didn't pretend he had perfect answers. "We go where Shadow takes us," he said. Outside, the wind shifted, the cabin creaked, and the smoke smell deepened, threading through the cracks like a warning the mountain didn't bother to whisper. The first crackle didn't sound like danger. It sounded like distance, like a campfire someone else had built miles away and forgotten to tend. Ethan knew better. He'd heard fire before, not just the roar of it, but the way it announced intent long before flames showed their teeth. Fire talked through smell first, then through heat, then through sound. By the time you saw it clearly, it was already negotiating terms. Shadow's ears pinned back. Not fear. Focus. Ethan slung the duffel over his shoulder, tightened the strap, and checked the carrier where Lena had tucked the puppies. Milo whimpered once, then went quiet when Shadow pressed his nose against the mesh and breathed slow. Lucas stood near the door, jaw clenched, hands flexing inside his gloves. The energy in him had shifted from rookie eagerness to something rawer, fight or flight, but disciplined enough not to bolt. Ethan caught his eye. "Lucas," he said. "Yes, sir." "You stay on me," Ethan said. "You don't run, you don't freeze, you don't question Shadow. If I say drop, you drop. If I say move, you move." Lucas nodded, swallowing. "Copy." Lena stood by the stove, puppies secured, her body angled toward Ethan like gravity pulled her there. "What about the cabin?" she asked. Ethan didn't sugarcoat it. "The cabin is wooden memory," he said. "You're alive." That was the answer. The back door opened into a wall of cold and smoke. The air tasted wrong, sharp, chemical, layered with the acrid bite of burning brush. Wind shoved against them like an impatient hand. Shadow stepped out first, nose low, tail straight, body reading terrain the way a map read lines. Ethan followed, boots biting into snow. Lucas came next, shoulders hunched. Lena last, clutching the carrier tight against her chest. The world beyond the cabin was chaos in slow motion. Snow still fell, but now it carried ash, tiny dark flecks that landed on white and refused to melt. The wind shifted again, stronger now, dragging smoke across the slope in uneven curtains. Somewhere below something popped, then another. Fire eating through frozen branches. Ethan's gaze snapped upslope. The glow was faint but unmistakable, a dull orange smear low on the horizon, like a bruise forming under the skin of the night. "Shadow," Ethan murmured. The dog moved. He didn't charge downhill, he didn't take the obvious path. He veered sideways, angling across the slope where the wind carved thinner snow and the trees grew farther apart. Lucas hesitated for half a second, then followed. The forest swallowed them. Branches whipped at their coats, snow slid off boughs and dumped down collars. Visibility dropped to arm's length. Ethan kept one hand out, brushing bark, counting steps in his head. He listened, not just for fire, but for pursuit. Fire had a sound, a hunger. Men had a different one. Shadow paused suddenly. Ethan stopped so fast his boots slid. Shadow's head turned, ears pricked. Lucas froze mid-step, breath fogging hard. Lena's grip tightened. Milo whimpered again. Ethan crouched slightly, lowering his center of gravity. He listened. At first, nothing. Then a crunch. Not snow falling. A step. Another. Too deliberate. Ethan's jaw tightened. Shadow didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply moved, silent as a shadow, circling wide, positioning himself between the sound and the humans. Ethan whispered, barely sound at all. "Stay?" Lucas's eyes were wide now, white stark in the dim. He nodded, shaking. The glow behind them brightened. Heat kissed Ethan's back through layers of gear. Fire was moving faster now. The crunch came again, closer. Ethan's hand went to his sidearm, but he didn't draw yet. Gunfire in a forest fire was chaos stacked on chaos. You didn't escalate unless you had to. Shadow disappeared into the trees. For 2 heartbeats, Ethan felt the cold stab of separation. Then, a snarl tore through the night. Not loud, controlled, followed by a man's startled curse. Ethan didn't see the contact, but he heard enough. The thud of a body hitting snow, the sharp intake of breath when pain surprised confidence. Shadow burst back into view, teeth bared, body planted over something Ethan couldn't see. The man tried to move. Shadow growled, low, final. The message was clear. Stay down. Ethan stepped forward, weapon now drawn but steady. "Don't," he said into the dark. The man froze. Ethan couldn't see his face clearly through smoke and branches, but he saw the shape of a jacket, the glint of something metal half buried in snow. Lucas sucked in a breath. Ethan didn't approach further. "Shadow," he commanded. The dog held position, but eased the pressure, teeth still close, body still dominant. Ethan backed away slowly, never turning his back. "We move," he said. They did. Behind them, the fire roared louder, wind feeding it like a bellows. The orange glow leapt higher, licking treetops. Shadow rejoined the group and took point again, leading them downhill now, away from the advancing heat. The slope dropped sharply. Snow gave way to patches of exposed rock and slick ice. Lucas slipped once, caught himself on a sapling, heart hammering. Lena stumbled, and Ethan was there instantly, one hand steadying her elbow without breaking stride. "You're good," he said. "Keep moving." Her breath came in ragged pulls, but she nodded. Shadow barked once, sharp, directional. Ethan followed the line of his body language and saw it. A narrow ridgeline ahead, exposed rock where snow hadn't settled thick. Windswept, bare, a place fire couldn't take as easily. "Go!" Ethan urged. They pushed harder, lungs burning now, smoke clawing at throats. Behind them, the forest crackled and screamed. At the ridge, the world opened up. Wind hit them full force, nearly knocking Lucas off his feet. The sky above was a roiling mess of cloud and ash, lit from below by fire. Ethan pulled them to the rock face, pressing bodies low. Shadow stood at the edge, silhouetted against the glow, scanning. For a moment, just a moment, Ethan allowed himself to feel the weight of it. The danger, the choice, the fact that he was here, again standing between something hungry and people who needed him. But this time it wasn't a war zone, it was a decision. A sharp sound cut through the wind, not fire, an engine. Ethan's head snapped up. Below the ridge, lights punched through smoke, white, then red and blue, multiple vehicles, heavy ones. Ethan's chest loosened just enough to breathe. Shadow barked, twice, relief, sharp and bright. Lucas laughed, half hysterical, half sob. "They found us." Lena sank to her knees, clutching the carrier to her chest, as if the puppies were anchors holding her to the world. Ethan stayed standing. He watched the lights climb, watched figures move with purpose, watched the shape of authority that felt, finally, right. When Captain Maria Hayes's voice came through a loudspeaker, steady and unmistakable, Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. Not because he was weak, because he had held everything together long enough to let go. Shadow leaned against his leg, solid and warm, a living reminder that he hadn't done it alone. The wind tried to tear the sound away, but it couldn't quite manage it. "Officer Cole," Captain Maria Hayes's voice carried up the ridge, amplified and calm, the kind of calm that meant chaos had already been sorted into priorities. "This is Captain Hayes. We have visual. Stay where you are." Ethan raised one hand, palm open, a simple signal against the glow and smoke. Shadow stood at his side, chest forward, tail steady, no longer hunting, no longer guiding, just guarding. Below them, figures moved with the practiced coordination Ethan recognized immediately. Not rushed, not tentative. Headlamps cut clean cones through the smoke. One unit angled toward the fire line, another toward the slope, another toward the ridge access. This wasn't a scramble, this was control. Lucas dropped onto a rock and bent forward, hands braced on his knees, sucking in air like he'd just discovered how badly he wanted to keep breathing. He laughed once, short and disbelieving, then pressed his forehead to his gloves. I thought we were done for," he said. Ethan didn't answer right away. He watched the perimeter close, watched Maria's people claim ground inch by inch. "We weren't," Ethan said finally. "You followed instructions." Lucas looked up at him, eyes bright and glassy. Shadow did. Shadow flicked an ear at the sound of his name, then returned his gaze to the tree line, just in case the mountain wanted one last argument. Lena sat with her back against the rock face, knees drawn up, the carrier locked in her arms. Milo and Rosie were silent now, pressed together in a small, warm knot. She stared down at them like she was afraid if she looked away, the night might take them back. Ethan crouched near her, keeping his body between her and the open slope. "You did good," he said quietly. Her breath stuttered. "I didn't know if anyone would come," she admitted. "I kept thinking, what if this was it? What if I was just wrong?" Ethan shook his head once. "You weren't wrong. You were early." That seemed to land. She closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. Boots crunched closer. A shape climbed the last stretch of ridge and resolved into Captain Maria Hayes herself. Parka dusted with ash, dark hair pulled back, eyes sharp and assessing even before she stopped moving. She took in the scene in a single sweep. Ethan standing, shadow planted, Lucas folded over and breathing, Lena crouched with the puppies. Maria met Ethan's eyes. "You always pick the quiet places," she said dryly. Ethan let out a breath that might have been a laugh in another life. "It followed me." Maria stepped closer and rested a hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder, professional, grounding. "You're safe now," she said. Then she turned to Lena. "I'm Captain Maria Hayes," she said, voice shifting subtly. Less command, more steadiness. "I'm going to need the evidence you mentioned, and then we're going to get you warm." Lena looked at Ethan. He nodded. She reached inside her jacket with shaking fingers. Ethan caught her wrist gently, guiding her movement so she didn't fumble. He took the waterproof pouch out and handed it to Maria himself. "Chain of custody," he said. Maria nodded approvingly. "Already logged." More personnel arrived, fanning out. Someone draped a thermal blanket over Lucas's shoulders. Another knelt by Lena, checking her hands for frostbite, murmuring reassurance. Shadow finally sat, muscles easing for the first time since the fire started. Ethan knelt beside him, fingers pressing into thick fur, grounding himself in the simple reality of warmth and breath. The fire was still burning behind them, but now it had boundaries, containment lines, plans, names attached to radios. It no longer owned the night. The next hours blurred into something both sharp and unreal. Ethan answered questions, short, precise, times, directions, what Shadow alerted to, where Lucas found the tracks, where the fire started relative to the cabin. Maria didn't interrupt him once. She let him tell it clean. Lena was taken down the mountain in a separate vehicle, wrapped in blankets, the puppies cradled against her chest. Before she left, she looked back at Ethan, eyes searching. "You're coming, right?" she asked. Ethan hesitated only a fraction. "I'll follow." Shadow's tail thumped once, decisive. At the command post below, the storm finally began to lose its grip. Snow fell lighter, smoke thinned, the air smelled raw but breathable. Maria stood with Ethan near the edge of the temporary lights, radios crackling behind them. "Federal's taking interest," she said. "Fast," Ethan nodded. "They would." "Your call earlier helped," Maria continued. "We rerouted through channels that don't owe favors to anyone local." Ethan didn't respond, but his jaw tightened in quiet agreement. Maria studied him for a moment. "You did more than your job tonight." Ethan looked toward where Lena sat inside an ambulance, puppies visible through the window. "I didn't want the easy ending," he said. Maria nodded. "That's why I called you." Weeks passed, not quietly but purposefully. Investigators arrived. Statements were taken. The evidence Lena copied was validated against independent samples. Patterns emerged where excuses used to live. The fire was officially ruled arson. Contained quickly enough to avoid disaster, but not quickly enough to erase intent. Lena testified. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. Lucas sat in on part of it, notebook in hand, eyes sharp now in a way they hadn't been before. Shadow attended everything he could, lying at Ethan's feet like a steady punctuation mark. The operation expanded beyond the region. Names traveled upward. So did consequences. One afternoon, Maria stood in the lookout cabin, no longer smelling of smoke, no longer half buried in snow, and watched Ethan sand a rough beam near the door. "You could sell it now," she said. "Get out." Ethan paused, considering. Shadow lay nearby, chin on paws, watching sawdust drift. "I thought about that," Ethan admitted. "Before. And now?" Ethan glanced toward the yard, where Lena knelt in the grass with Milo and Rosie, bigger now, clumsier, chasing each other in lopsided circles. "Now it feels like a beginning," he said. Maria smiled, small but genuine. "Good." The sign went up in early spring. Nothing flashy, just clean wood, hand-painted letters. Harbor Ridge Haven. Lena stood back to read it, hands on her hips. "Harbor," she said, "because it's somewhere you can stop before you sink." Ethan nodded. "Ridge," Lucas added, grinning, "because it's still uphill." Shadow barked once, approving. People came slowly at first. Veterans, first responders, folks with stories that didn't fit neatly anywhere else. They stayed, they worked, they healed in inches, not miracles. Shadow learned new tasks, interrupting panic spirals, grounding trembling hands, lying heavy across legs when memories got loud. Ethan slept better, not perfectly, but better. One evening, months later, Ethan stood on the porch, watching the sun slide behind the mountains. Lena laughed in the yard as the dogs barreled past her, all legs and joy. Shadow leaned against Ethan's boot, warm and real. Ethan realized, softly without drama, that the silence no longer felt like a threat. It felt like space, and for the first time in a long while he was exactly where he chose to be.